Hawaii's lack of affordable housing is a contributing factor to the state's homeless crisis. Could tiny homes be the answer? The state plans to develop villages comprised of tiny homes to shelter the houseless, but there are concerns from residents, especially when it comes to where these communities will be built. We'll ask how these concerns are being addressed and the status of future villages. Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Yanji Denise. After taking office, Governor Josh Green signed an emergency proclamation on homelessness, allowing the state to cut through red tape to begin construction of Kauhane. These communities are comprised of modest housing units for individuals or small households with shared spaces for cooking, eating, and recreation. The state is hoping to build 12 villages this year and 20 by the end of next year. Not everyone is for it, though, with some residents saying, "Not in my backyard." But is this short-term housing model a better way to address our long-term homeless epidemic? That's what our panel is discussing tonight. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email or call in your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and on the PBS Hawaii Facebook page. Now to our guests. John Mizuno is the state coordinator on homelessness. He was appointed by Governor Green and has been on the job since the beginning of the year. Prior to this, he served for 20 years in the State House. Connie Mitchell is the executive director for the Institute for Human Services, or IHS. The nonprofit helps individuals and families exit homelessness by providing a number of services, including food, shelter, health, and employment. And Kimo Carvalho is the executive director of HomeAid Hawaii. The organization focuses on creating housing for those who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. The nonprofit is partnering with the state to build the Kauhane, or tiny villages. Thank you all for being here tonight. John, I want to start with you. We've heard the governor talk at length about Kauhane, but for folks who are not familiar with the concept, tell us briefly, what is Kauhane?
Absolutely. It's a village concept, communal living. A number of people are there. It serves almost like an ohana. It's a very important factor in helping our people get dignity, self-worth, self-confidence. So that's basically the concept of Kauhane, and it has been very successful. So we're hopeful to build and open up more Kauhane.
Connie, you've worked with this issue for many, many years. Tell us what you think is different about this approach.
I think it's an emphasis on relationships, because when you talk about a village, it really means that there are people that are coming together, really helping each other, and that really helps to sometimes cut down on the cost of other things like staffing and things like that, because they're really taking care of themselves. But of course, they need some facilitation and supportive services. So along with the building, and the people that are in there, the supportive services are very important as well.
Kimo, tell us a little bit about what these actually look like. Your agency is responsible to build them. We know that they kind of differ region by region, neighborhood by neighborhood, if you will. Not every Kauhane is, what we saw across the street from the Queens Medical Center with those small units. But tell us what these actually look like physically.
Sure. So, we're focused, of course, first and foremost on the subpopulation of homelessness. So we want to make sure that, our communities and villages are tailored to those who we're serving. So there's homeless veterans, there's kupuna, there's homeless youth, there's medically frail homeless that needs, different types of services. So our physical communities can actually differ based on just those populations alone. Our tiny homes, they're about 100 square feet. They're very comfortable. We get a lot of judgment for them, but for every client I've talked to, they actually feel really comfortable in them. They feel a sense of dignified housing. They are, they have a space to keep their personal belongings safe. They can lock their doors. They have windows, a ceiling fan. They have electric. These homes are, of course, not permitted. There is no code in the state of Hawaii for tiny homes. So we are able to utilize the Emergency Proclamation on Homelessness. We never compromise on health, safety, culture, or environment when we develop. But it allows us the opportunity to develop alternative housing solutions that otherwise wouldn't be approved or permitted here in the state of Hawaii. So for most of these communities, like the one in Windward, Oahu, or the one at Middle Street on Oahu, There are sort of row homes, which is sort of one of our missing middle housing inventory that we've been advocating for quite a while.
And did I hear correctly, 100 square feet? That sounds very small.
It is, but it's spacious. You got to think space saving. For a lot of our clientele, the affordability of developing these homes actually is passed on to them in the form of rent. And for the lowest area median income of our population, that's the rent that they need. They need a starter-up home to come off the streets, feel safe, start getting connected to hygiene and critical services. Our developments are affordable, and our approach to housing is to make the construction process more affordable through deep discounts in donated materials and supplies and pro bono labor. And part of that also is developing shared infrastructure. So what that means is you have shared laundry, kitchens, hygiene centers, so restroom, showers, and so that reduces the cost on infrastructure, which allows us to actually pass on even more affordability to the end user, which is the homeless.
John, I want to key in on something that Kimo just said, and that was rent, because I think a lot of people don't realize that the folks who are staying in these might actually have to put in some money. Tell us a little bit about the eligibility, the cost. How does one get to live in a kauhale?
Absolutely. If the person's homeless, the operator, for example, Connie I'm the homeless guy, she would sign me up for Medicaid, so now I'm covered for health care. The feds pay for the majority of that, so that's a win for the state. Second, Connie's going to make sure that I apply and get SNAP food stamps. Significant amount of money, $448 million, to the state every year. Who would have thought homeless and low-income families can help with the state's economy? Third, Connie's going to check to see if I can qualify for SSI or general assistance from the state. It could be $450, it could be $900. General assistance could be $400. So at the end of the day, I could be actually paying rent. After, usually we ask for 3 to 6 months, and once we hit that period and I'm getting money, I should be able to pay. We should not, respectfully, have any free rides. It's self-worth, but it's dignity, and it's doing the right thing. So people think homeless are getting a free ride. That's not actually true. They're helping our economy move forward, and it's the right thing to do.
So, sorry, Connie, go ahead.
And a lot of them actually find work, because we really focus on employment and vocational training. So for some of them, when they start to earn a living and now the minimum wage has gone up, they certainly can afford to pay something.
And how much would that something be?
Well, I think most of them are starting at about $250, and then some of them are more, but we kind of gauge what people are able to pay, but it's very modest, because it's just a room really for folks, right? And I think after a while, they realize, okay, well maybe I will move on, because you were saying it's 100 square feet. For some people, believe me, it is really, really comforting to have that space. 100 square feet of your own compared to living on the street is a luxury, for them. So I think it's, it's really perspective when you think about it, in terms of what kind of space you actually have.
Right, and just the ability to close and lock a door.
Exactly.
Right, to have that privacy and that security. I'm interested because I know your agency does operate one of these kauhale. Tell us a little bit about the one that you're running and how it compares to the others.
So I think our kauhale that we just opened last month, Pai Ho, is actually a different sort of one. Kimo didn't build that one for us. It's actually comprised of 2 large houses, that have together, I think we have about 8 or 9 bedrooms, and so it really provides enough space for 12 people to live very comfortably. But it really encourages people to come together and think about how they're going to actually care for these 2 houses, this community now, and then take turns, doing certain chores, cooking maybe, sharing the food. And we also had the real privilege of having a community farmer come and actually help us, with establishing some aquaponic and hydroponic, grow systems. So you should see the lettuce. It's just wonderful lettuce. I've never seen such wonderful lettuce that he's grown, plus a lot of other things that are growing. So that just contributes to, inviting people to learn how to do something different as well. But these are, folks coming in who have completed treatment in some kind of substance abuse treatment. So it's a specific population that, we're working with. So it's a little bit different from the ones that, Kimo has built, because those are, I think, more general to, accommodate people in a particular community, like Windward or, by Middle Street. I think a lot of those, it's really more geographical. Ours is a particular population that we're trying to serve.
And just if I could ask, how does it run day to day? Do you have security or a social worker or a, I don't know, for lack of like a residential advisor? I'm thinking of like a college dorm, right? Somebody who's sort of manning the front desk, if you will. What is the role of the service provider? Because I know that depending on the village, there could be a different service provider. But what is the obligation there, and what do you have to do to run one of these?
So for us, we have a resident manager, who basically will, kind of be there to help facilitate community meetings. But we also have a person who's a case manager, who really will connect that person up with other services that they need, and then look at housing navigation, as they move toward, maybe looking at a more permanent place after they've been there for a while. But we really expect people to stay for at least a few months, there at that one, because they really need to regain a sense of their own competency. And so I think when they're able to do that and they feel like, oh yeah, I can make my own decisions and I want maybe more privacy, I want to develop more relationships, then they'll move on naturally. But it's not like you got to go after a certain time, you know what I mean?
Right, okay. And Kimo, how are you identifying the land that these are built on?
Yeah, great question. So in partnership with the state government, we are able to comb through all the different agencies who own land. So, DLNR, DHHL, DAGs, these are all landowners within the state administration. And what we do is we assess remnant parcels or unused lands that can be developable. And I think that one of the things I was talking to John about today actually is that, one of the outcomes that's going to come out of this whole journey is that we're able to utilize lands that the state owns that otherwise wouldn't have been able to be utilized previously. And I think that's exciting. So, we first and foremost, right now I'm assessing about 40 plus lands across the state of Hawaii. I just got back from Big Island yesterday. We drove from Hilo to Kona assessing about, just under a dozen sites. We bring a civil engineer, a planner. We look at critical infrastructure, sewage, water, electric. From there, we determine what is the maximum allowable density for the site based on the size of the site and what's humane and dignified and what can we actually do to facilitate that sense of community. From there, we work with John and his team to narrow down the sites to see which ones do we want to focus on. What does this look like for the homeless population of the area? And our approach to development is not just focused on construction and the land and the building process, but it's also community engagement. We want to make sure that, we connect with the community, they understand who is their homeless and what are the solutions to actually helping their homeless get off the streets. And most times that becomes an education campaign, a conversation, and from there we have the facts of being able to couple the land with the needs of the community.
And how has the community response been? We know that with the Queens site, which was the first one in the state, that the governor, sort of made a big show of this is in my backyard, if you will, because the governor's house is right there, not even across the street, on the same block. But how is that being received?
To be 100% honest, majority of the communities that I go into has a lot of supporters around the concept of housing homeless in their communities. But the vocal minority does come out, and oftentimes, that it's okay. We understand, the baseline of information that they're operating from. There's often the common theme is always safety, risk of crime. We have to go through an education campaign, so to speak, of really helping them understand who is homeless, who is not, why is there safety issues. There's not been one community that I have been part of that didn't run into at least some conflict, but it doesn't mean to say that these are bad communities. They are actually, they just want to have a conversation. They want to be heard. When I used to work for IHS with Connie, it's interesting because every development and every community that we opened has actually been so successful, and there hasn't actually been those serious issues in any of the communities that we've built. In fact, when I think about Kauhane Village, we've saved Pu'uhale Elementary School from closing down because they didn't have enough teachers to fit the desks or desks to fit the teachers. We helped stimulate the economy of the area. To John's point, you had medical offices, grocery stores, restaurants stimulated. You had bus routes that actually had passengers. So I think Kauhane and the communities that we go to add value, and I think when we go into these communities and we help educate them about those positive impacts, you start seeing the tone shift. And we just experienced that in Big Island, and it was amazing.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, we went to the Big Island, Hilo, and I thought, I told Kimo, I think it's going to be harsh. I think we're going to get yelled at. And I was surprised. I think halfway through, people were very supportive, very warm, very appreciative. So they're very supportive of helping homeless in this Kauhane method. I was amazed. I was actually shocked. I thought they were going to be angry. To go back on Kimo's point, I love working with Kimo because he called me yesterday, just got back from the Big Island, and the 4 spots that he was going to go to scout, we know each one. DOT by the airport lot, good to go. Access to water, good to go. I mean, I'm like, great, Mayor Roth wants that spot. So people may think, you know, it's like we got a dartboard and we're just saying, what should we pick? It is a lot more complex. And I love the fact that Kimo will call me, we'll debrief sometimes every day. And we'll know the exact lot, the exact TMK. And if we don't, he'll check on me and then we'll double check on it. Maui, I know the 2 spots that he's going to. Kauai, we're working on 1 spot, but it's amazing. So it's a partnership. It really is to make this successful. And I just appreciate working with both Connie and Kimo.
And there's
Sorry, I was going to say one thing, back to your question about what makes us different. In every community that is supporting it, what they see is a community first model, and they're saying that's different. I haven't seen that before. And I guess what's different is in the past 2 decades, we've been promoting what's called a housing first model, where we utilize scattered site housing across affordable housing developments. And it's worked to some extent, but it's not worked for others. And so this is different, and they're noticing that, and that's where a lot of the support is coming from.
There's an email from Dan, and John, if you would take this one. Why can't we build more kauhale faster? What is the pace? And you know, we said at the start of this that 12 by the end of this year, 20 by next year. What's the goal? And you know, to Dan's point, why can't we get them online quicker?
Dan's got an excellent point. And you know, Connie, you know, Kimo and I, we have been at rocket speed. So truth be told, 12 kauhale was supposed to be for governor's first term. Now it turned by the end of 2024. And by next year, governor wants 20 kauhale. We are, I mean, as fast as Kimo can build the units, we're opening up. And so, I don't know, Kimo, we're going as fast as we can, right?
If you were to look at the kauhales that we've done here on Oahu, well, first of all, I don't think they would have been done because they wouldn't have been permitted. But under our current regulations, those would have taken a couple years. We were able to do those within 3 to 4 months. And, you know, per site, I think that's incredible. The power of the emergency proclamation and the tools that we have, it is a privilege, and we do not take it for granted, you know, but we make sure that, you know, what we're able to do is as efficient as possible to scale and meet I mean, I wish we could go faster.
I am curious, though, once these are up and running, are these permanent sites? Can we expect that these will stay? I know that the Connie was saying that, you know, 3 to 6 months, and hopefully these folks transition on to another housing situation. But the village itself, is that going to be a permanent fixture in that community?
I hope so. You know, I think we're in proof of concept with John, and we want to demonstrate what we're capable of. And I think that's for the community to decide. But I think that what we're doing has a lot of potential to be permanent for as long as it needs to be. The units that we're developing are stick build, and that has a long life span. And so that's, you know, so we're thinking permanent even as we're pursuing this.
Okay.
To add to Kimo's point, the Ivole kauhale that we're going to start to build, we're going to have to move some of them because of the rail coming in. But the other kauhale that Kimo was talking about, we'd like for them to be permanent. Windward, Middle Street, and a couple others ready to go. So yes, we'd absolutely like that.
But even with the one that is not permanent, you know, they can move the units to another site.
Right, which is what we saw happen at Queens. Right. But I'm interested also, you know, a building is one thing. Dan says, why can't we build them faster? But we also need the service providers. So do we have enough service providers to provide the support services that you were describing, the residential specialist or residential assistant, I forget what the title of the person is, but basically the manager, right? Along with perhaps a social worker or medical personnel and what have you?
That's a really good question, Yunji, because in the homeless services community, what we've seen is that we have a shortage of people. And I'll just use this as a plug, you know, because we're recruiting people all the time. But I think, you know, it's a hard kind of work to do sometimes, and I think it takes a certain kind of person who really wants to, really help people who are in this particular situation. And it's been a situation where we've had to kind of compete with healthcare, and I think now there's just a real impetus to help develop that workforce. We need contracts from the state and the city to pay our people enough so that we can, really attract the people and really keep them in the workforce. But it is going to be challenging. Even if you build really fast, Kimo, we're going to have a lot more people, to be able to help, really support them.
Linda from Pearl City has a question that I'm hoping that you can answer, Connie. How do we get in touch with somebody if we are interested in living in a tiny home? Who do we contact? Can we call on behalf of someone who needs a home like this?
I think they call your office, right?
We just got someone at Auntie Blanche's this morning, 9 a.m., 7-8-year-old who was being moved out of a shelter. So he had no place to go. And so, yeah, my staff had picked her up at 9 a.m. and she's now at Auntie Blanche's in Waimanalo. So generally people call our office. They need help.
I would imagine that, how many homeless folks do we have in our state, do you think, that could transition into a house like this? I can imagine that you're going to have a lot more takers than you have beds.
Absolutely. The goal is to end chronically homeless or reduce it by half. So that's a little over 4,000. We'd like to house at least 2,000 by the end of governor's term.
Wow, 2,000, okay. In these small homes, this is from Linda in Pearl City, in these small homes, how do they handle if there's a problem with the person living there, like someone is on drugs or creating problems for the others? What kind of rules are there for the residents?
The operators work with the residents. We had an incident at Windward. It couldn't be addressed, and so that person was unfortunately kicked out. Middle Street had a similar incident. Someone was, acting violently. But they're able to address his concerns and everyone's cool. It worked out. So usually it's the village mentality and the operator works as a peacemaker. If someone's using but they're not violent, they try to help that person get better and sleep it off. But if someone gets violent, that's a red flag, and we try to respectfully get that person to a different place so he or she wouldn't cause any harm to the rest of the people.
Sometimes, Yunji, I think, when we encounter people who are having challenges, behaviorally, we have to assess whether they need maybe mental health treatment or substance abuse treatment. And in those cases, that is offered to them and really encourage. We do a lot of motivational interviewing with people and really encourage them. And, we have other resources in our system now. If they want to get detox, and that would help them, then we can make that referral to other people as well, or, to that service and then come back even, So there are definitely solutions, and, we don't want to exit people, as much as possible. But sometimes, as, was said, as John mentioned, we have to say, okay, I think we need to take a break, and, you can go to this other shelter maybe and then come back, or just you can't come back for a while.
We're getting a lot of questions, which we love, so thank you for those of you who are calling in or emailing us. Alan on the North Shore has a question. Kimo, I'm hoping you can tackle this one. In the past, there was a Weinberg village that was successful but abandoned after several years. Can something like this be reutilized? To what extent are you building from scratch, and how much of it is, what Connie was describing, a house that then is transformed into something else?
Yep. So, our system right now we're lacking transitional housing beds. And so I believe that Kauhane is a solution to fix, that gap in the system. And so I'm really happy that we're able to add inventory. But for Weinberg Village and other sites that once, stood as that kind of transitional housing, we're more than willing to renovate buildings and look at a different type of Kauhane model, as long as, like what Connie was saying earlier, Kauhane is really about bringing a sense of community to each other and, finding connection, and I think however that facility lends to that model, we're open. But right now, there's 434 units that we're currently building, about 125 ready to go here in Oahu. We have 9 sites across the state that we're currently planning and getting ready to develop Our hope is to meet, Governor and John's goal of 2,000, and I think that's possible. But, I think it doesn't always have to be this tiny home model. It can be other types of facilities and structures. And I was just going to say, I lost my point. Don't worry.
Okay, well, we've got enough questions, so
Yep.
I'm sure we can come back to you if you think of it. This is a question, and you did say that the goal is 3 to 6 months, but this person asked, once a person moves into a tiny home, are they allowed to live there forever?
Some, yeah. I think the idea when Governor Green was talking about Kauhane was, if that is the choice that people want to live in, that kind of communal style living, then let's give it to them. Let's offer it to them. But for ours in particular, because it is a specific population, we want to, again, tailor it to where they need it and what they need. But my guess is that some people living in our Kauhane will want to move on. And we want to offer that opportunity to somebody else also.
There are 3 questions here, John. I hope you can take them. This one is from Linda. What criteria do you use to select the people that will be living in these homes? Who does and does not qualify? Shannon says they should only build tiny homes for local residents. She notices that other homes for low income and homeless are mostly made up of non-Hawaii residents. And John in Honolulu is saying, what is your definition of homelessness? Are there steps in place to prevent other states from sending their homeless here? Our tax money pays for this. Is there a residency requirement for folks who are eligible to live in these spaces?
So long as they view Hawaii as their going to be their permanent residency, they're okay. Connie and I did work on a bill last year, Return to Home. There are other states, it's not a myth, that send their homeless to Hawaii. That happened a number of years ago. I wrote to the U.S. Attorney General to stop that program. It's called the SOTA program in New York. After I made a complaint, other elected officials chimed in and that program was shut down. So it has happened before. We have the Return to Home program, so if you're from the mainland, you're homeless and you want to go back to California, Texas, or Florida, Connie will work with that person, connect with the family, have them pay for half the flight expenses, and have that family or that support group accept that person. So we don't do what other states do. We don't sweep our homeless out, but we make sure there's a support system willing to accept them. Criteria for going into a kauhale, it kind of depends on the operator. Windward, high standards. Community was not willing to accept the kauhale. We had to make sure the person was not on the sex offender list. We had to make sure that person didn't have any violent behavior or criminal acts which displayed violence. Really high barrier. Middle Street, low barrier. People are pretty mellow at that point. So really depends where the area is, what community it's in, and the operator. So that's how we rode with that. Hope I was able to answer those questions.
You were. And building on that, Connie, this is an issue that comes up every time we have you on and we talk about homelessness. People want to know, and this viewer is the same, where do most of these homeless come from? So building on what John was just answering, if you want to make Hawaii your home, then you are eligible. You don't necessarily have to be a resident of the state of Hawaii. Is that right?
Yeah, you don't. But I think we need to remember that most of the people that are experiencing homelessness in Hawaii are local people. I think that people think that there's a large majority of people that are really not from here, that are the people that are homeless, but they aren't. And I think the other thing to remember is that I used to feel like, well, I'm local. I don't necessarily want a lot of people coming into the state, and as John says, kind of like using our resources. But the fact is that if somebody comes, and if we do need workers here, if they're willing to work, I'm for really supporting them and helping them to be able to do that. Now, if they don't want to work, and I feel like they're just coming and they're just really wanting to just receive housing, then we have some discussions about that, because it really isn't right, for the person to just come. Now, I don't have a right to tell them that they're not eligible or they can't, do it, but we prioritize the people who are from Hawaii. We want those people to be able to move forward and to have the housing that is really the thing that they need. So yeah, I think we really do try to keep that in mind, but we also keep in mind we need new people to come too. We're losing people to the continent also every year.
Right, and just because I think people will be interested, this bill that you worked on this session, tell us a little bit about that, this return to home funding that you got.
Right, for several years now, we have a program, that was returning people, to the continent. But this was the first year that the state actually invested in providing a contract to do so. But it's pretty much what we've been doing, which is to really help determine, what support system the person had somewhere else, because we don't want to return them to, excuse me, to homelessness. So the idea is to help them get back with family or with another support system, and to be able to get the services and not be homeless somewhere else.
Okay, and so far, how many people have you helped to get back to the continent?
Well, as John said, it's about 700 or so.
About 700 with Yanji, less than 2% returning to Hawaii. Very successful.
Okay. Kimo, these are some questions for you that I'm hoping that you can take. Joseph says, has there been any thought to volunteer community construction programs modeled in Habitat for Humanity? Malia from Waikiki, can we team up with Habitat for Humanity or groups like that for helping to develop these tiny homes? And Shannon from Maui says she'd like to know how to volunteer to help the program on Maui and wants to know how. So you've got a lot of people willing to pick up a hammer for you and get to work.
That's great. Give me a call. So just to clarify, HomeAid Hawaii is on the opposite spectrum of Habitat for Humanity. Habitat for Humanity, like HomeAid, receives volunteers and approaches construction or affordable housing by reducing the cost of construction, and passes that on to the end user. For HomeAid Hawaii, our target population and end user is homelessness, and for Habitat, it's homeowners. So those are folks who are going to get a lease and they actually have equity, which is very opposite from our population. Great organization, very similar model, but different target population.
And the way that yours works is you have construction companies and people from the trades who actually volunteer their time to help with what you're doing.
Correct. So HomeAid Hawaii was developed by the builders industry in response to our homeless crisis. About a decade ago, Hawaii had the largest homelessness rate in the nation, and Kaka'ako was our largest homeless encampment in the country. And the builders kept saying that there just wasn't a voice representing the development industry in these homeless solutions. There are all these affordable housing advocates and great people, great organizations, but they just kept advocating for subsidizing affordable housing, which wasn't actually moving homeless people off the streets. And so we felt the need as a development industry to, offer other solutions. And that's how we got into this. And so, we partner with the building industry to achieve that affordable construction development process. They are coming in at about 40% savings in pro bono labor, donated materials and supplies. And as a nonprofit, when we're able to fundraise successfully, so far we've completed 18 projects, and we're averaging somewhere around 77-78% savings when we bring in philanthropy coupled with the building industry support. So it's truly making this an affordable development process.
And that is good to hear. There is a money question here. John, can you take this one? Eric and Kailua, how sustainable is this program? Does the state have the resources to pay for these for years going forward? If these are somewhat permanent, parts of the community, who pays for this long term?
Right. It's supposed to be self-sustainable. So you put in a couple $1 million to start out at Kauhane, maybe 50, maybe 100 units. Eventually, I'll keep in mind now, this is the economic question. Again, Connie's going to sign me up for Medicaid. Now my health care is covered, majority of that by federal government. Second, Connie's going to get me on SNAP, food stamps. Significant amount of money is going to roll into our state economy because of food stamps. Third, Connie's going to see if I'm eligible for SSI, if not for general assistance from the state. And she's going to work to see that I get employed within 6 to 9 months. If I get a job and I'm paying rent, albeit $300 a month, I'm putting money into the economy. I'm not just taking money away. I'm helping the state move forward. In about 2 to 3 years, Connie as the operator can actually step off. Me as the homeless person, I'm working security, I know other things. They may just pass it on to me, pass the baton on to me, and I run the homeless shelter or the homeless Kauhane. Without government, without an operator, they can step back after 2 or 3 years. If we can do that, self-sufficient at its finest. That's what we're trying to do.
So the ultimate goal is to have the service provider eventually sort of retire, if you will.
In a positive manner, yes. They work themselves out of a job.
Okay.
And just to clarify, what we're building in terms of Kauhane is not a shelter. It's housing that has some income generated. So, we're hoping that, with the affordability of what we're able to design, coupled with the rents to operate, it does pencil. And, I think there's going to need to be, and we're learning a lot from what Connie's doing at Kauhane Village. I think that was probably the best pilot and model that we've been able to see, longitudinally. And so we're taking a lot of those lessons learned, but we're trying to make sure that, we're really focused on some kind of self-sufficient development model that, to John's point, has some self-sufficiency to it.
I think that's a really important distinction, that this is not a shelter, that this is a different model. Connie, can you tell us a little bit more about why you think this is money well spent from the taxpayer's side?
So I think, as John was mentioning, when people are learning to pay rent, and then the rent itself, is sufficient to actually do the property management, because in any kind of building, you're going to have to manage it, you're going to have to sustain it, and so the rents have to be enough to make sure that repairs can be made. Other things are done, like a property manager who kind of make sure that things are done a certain way and that people are paying the rent, and things like that. So I think at Kauhane Village, we've really learned, a lot, as we took over management of, the entire development, and it's penciling out, So I feel like it is very possible. I think one thing that was alluded to was the issue of leadership development among the people that are living there. And, we have a HAWAIʻI, at Kauhane Village, where they are the residents that come together and they decide on, some things like, well, we tell them, oh, somebody wants to come and they want to offer this kind of, help, volunteer. And they get a chance to say, oh, well, I don't think anybody's interested. They'll kind of like go around and see whether people would do it or not. So I think it's definitely a way to help people invest, in themselves, and also to learn how to lead other people, how to be that group of people that can do the work, that normally, the state would have to pay for.
There's Barbara from Kailua has a compliment for Connie, and also something that I want to ask John about. She says, mahalo nui loa to Connie Mitchell for what she and IHS have been doing for years. Every community on this island should have a kauhale. That's from Barbara. So you both were talking about a recent visit to Hawaii Island. John, if I could start with you, what is the plan for the neighbor islands? You talked briefly about looking at this in different island communities, but what can we expect? Because we do tend to be Oahu focused, but we know that there's a need on every island.
Absolutely. You don't want to be Oahu centric. We want to help the entire state. Kimo and I have been talking about this. We've got 2 pretty solid locations, actually 3 on a big island. Kona, Hilo, and another area kind of in between by Mountain View. Maui, we've got 2 locations that we've been talking about. Kauai, we've already worked on one, and I'm working with Kimo on another location. So yes, I mean, in a nutshell, we have identified, and we're going to continue our due diligence to see. So when we do share with the community, we'll let them know why we're picking these sites. But we are connecting with the community to see as if we'd love to have them be part of the vision in what we vision. So.
And Mountain View is very different from Middle Street. So tell us about the strategy that you have when you're building for all of these different communities.
Sure. Well, as it's been alluded to, we don't want to be Oahu-centric. We want to connect by first listening to the communities that we enter into. We have a great team that does community outreach and community engagement. They connect us with the communities. We listen. We hear who's homeless, what are their resources, what are their needs, what are the services, and how do we envision a kauhale that could work. For me on the building, and so there's a human services hat and there's a builder's hat. So when I put on my builder's hat, I'm looking at those critical infrastructure. So a place like Mountain View or others that are more rural, oftentimes the neighbor islands, the #1 challenge is infrastructure. And so, we're always looking at, if we're going to invest in a waste treatment package that may be a little bit more costly, maybe it's a larger site and a larger kauhale, and that becomes a negotiation with the community, with the state government. And so it's an iterative process. It's very hard, but it's good work. And I think what we're really aiming for is really to fine tune what is the right plan for each community. And it just takes a lot of hands and collaboration.
Connie, there's somebody who's watching on YouTube who says, I don't think we can fix the homeless problem if we don't have housing without drug rules, because as soon as some people see those rules, they just choose to remain on the street. Is that possible with access to harm reduction and drug counseling, of course? So what kind of counseling services are available? And, you know, would there be different, you know, you talked about the one that IHS is running, that is for folks who are transitioning out of a substance abuse program. So what kind of resources are available to that end, and what is the cost of things like that?
Well, I think, you know, last year we opened Imi'olapiha, which is a homeless triage center that's actually doing community-based detox, and that has been super successful. You know, when people want to get off the street and they want to get off of their drugs and alcohol, sometimes it's really, really rough, and you need the support of medical folks, you know, to do that. I think we've demonstrated that it can be done, and that we've been pretty successful at it in not even a whole year. You know, we opened last year in June, and I think we've detoxed over 120 people, and it's about 80% success that they complete their detox, and we're also completing a transition into more treatment. So it isn't just detoxing them and telling, okay, you can go back to the street. You know, it's really kind of giving them a whole package. And it's not just clinical, it's also looking at, you know, asking them, what do you want to do with your life? You know, and really having them say what it is, you know, that really would inspire them to stay clean and to move on. So I think there are services like that, not enough. I have to say, you know, we really need a system with a lot more services. But I think this last legislative session, they did want us, you know, fund another one out on the west side maybe, you know, or maybe on another island. But the idea is that we need more services, you know, to help with these clinical needs that are right there. And in terms of, you know, harm reduction and just really taking people where that's what I consider harm reduction, is that when we talk to people, we really listen. Where are they at? You know, what can they do, and what can we ask them to do to take another step forward, you know, toward health? Because if they don't, then, you know, the prospects of their quality of life is just really not good. And we know that, you know, if you stay on the street, chances are your life is shortened by about 30 years, you know.
30 and years, wow. I think it's important to understand that there's a continuum of housing solutions, and Kauhane is just one of those options.
Right.
For a substance abuse user or mentally ill homeless individual, a Kauhane might not be the right match. But maybe somebody who's gone through Imi'olapiha, that Connie's detox center, who has been clean and sober, has detoxed, but now does not want to return anywhere else because they want to be safe. Maybe that's where Kauhane becomes that option at that moment. Mm-hmm. So we have to, you know, kind of remove the stigma of people on the streets, Kauhane the solution. We're not trying to sweep people into Kauhanes.
Right, and that goes to this question from Mike in Makiki. Do you think making tiny homes is the way, or should there be apartment complexes for low-income residents? John, it's not sort of an either-or scenario, is it?
All of the above. We need more inventory.
Right.
Without housing, and without affordable housing, we're going to continue to have homelessness. So it's all of the above.
Okay.
So the city is acquiring a lot of property for that, you know, particular purpose as well. And, you know, we've heard about the mayor going to DC, you know, looking for more subsidies also for people going into those kinds of housing situations too. So really, I think between the state and the city, at least, you know, in our county and on the other counties too, I think people are looking at expanding the inventory, but we can't expand it fast enough. And so Kauhane is another way to expand it quickly for a transition. You know, for just maybe for some people it'll be temporary. Other people will love it and they'll want to stay forever, like you were saying.
And this is to that point. There's a caller from Macaulay says, why isn't anything being done about homeless encampments on the sidewalks? Sumner Street has been really bad. I think that, you know, people see us talking about these solutions. They hear the pledges from the governor, and yet in their own communities, we still see tents on the sidewalk. We still see people who are clearly mentally ill, perhaps violent, perhaps dangerous, or in desperate need of help. So there's this sort of highly visible homeless. You know, what do we do for the caller like that?
Be happy to answer that question. So a sweep, when I was in the legislature, county and state, they do numerous sweeps, millions of dollars, taxpayer costs. And I don't want to sound harsh, but that was stupid. Because if you sweep a homeless person, everyone knows in a couple of days or a week that person's going to be right back to the same spot he or she was before. Today, if we have enough kauhale, we're going to have a soft landing. So if I'm swept, it's no longer called a sweep. I'm going to be relocated into a kauhale or a shelter or an apartment. If you can do that, then we're going to start to get the tents off the sidewalks and keeping the sidewalks clean. And that's something we have to do because people in our community also have the right to feel safe in their communities. And we're not there yet, but we're working to that.
Mm-hmm. And when do you think that shift will come? What will it take? How long will it be?
It needs to be within months, not years, because that's the definition of insanity. If we're going to do the same thing and expect different results, I'm thinking within the next 3 to 12 months, we're going to see significant reduction in homelessness on the sidewalks, removal of the structures and the tents, because we're building more inventory, more kauhale, more shelters, more safe zones, areas where people can have a soft landing. That's the only way it's going to work. Sweeps are not going to work.
More treatment.
Do you share that same optimism? Do you think that this can be done in months?
I think a change can happen quickly, but I think we also need services. I'm going to emphasize that, John.
Yeah.
Because I think if we're just having people thinking we can get people off the sidewalk into housing, I think that that's a little bit optimistic without the kind of supportive services that some people need. And if they've been chronically homeless, we've been working with chronically homeless people for a long time, and if they can't change some of the things that they're doing, not everything, but just take a step in the right direction, it'd be very hard, for them to be able to go into housing and stay there. But I think, with more supportive services, more people understanding what it is that people need, to be supported, it can make a big change, I think.
Kimo, I want to see if we can ask you this one. There's 2 questions here, and I'm just interested in sort of how you build for this. Dee is asking, are pets allowed in the tiny homes, especially for disabled people? And then another question came in from a caller, are families moved into these tiny homes? So tell us about sort of some of the adaptations you have to make. And, disabled people is a good point. Also kupuna, because we know that we see an increasing number of people who on the street who are elderly.
Yep, and it goes back to my original point. There's many different subpopulations of homelessness. And in terms of the kauhale that we build, that's part of our collaboration with the operators and the service providers in the community. It's understanding who is homeless and who will be the beneficiary of these kauhale villages. I think that it's all negotiable. If there is a community that says we want our homeless to have a safe place for their pets, we will have that conversation. It's in my best interest to understand what that looks like in terms of how they want to design community spaces that builds connection with pets. I went to Austin, Texas to Camp Esperanza. It's one of the most successful Department of Transportation sites that I've seen that's transformed from a tent city into a village. And the funny thing is, there was a lot of pets, and actually that was one of the largest conflicts because there was people that kept wanting to claim ownership of pets. But then what it actually resulted in was sort of what Connie does is sort of this, community advisory council or community building aspect where they create rules and it's community led, and they actually think about how they're going to take care of their community, how should pets and the standards of behavior be set. And from there, you actually saw conflict get reduced, and you saw just a more organized and viable community. And so I think it's a process. It starts with the development, but then it's not just on me and what we do, it's also on the operator and making sure that there's at least, they're carrying that perspectives from when we built into the design of that community model, and that's what we're hoping for.
Yanchi, could I add?
Please.
So I know for Middle Street, they allow up to 2 pets, 2 dogs per person. So that's kauhale that actually allows pets. And to answer the other question about building kauhale for kupuna and disabled, we're working with Pastor Kim, Cedar Church in Kalihi, for a 16-unit kauhale, 11 for the elderly, kupuna, and another 5 for those that are medical respite, coming out of discharge from ER or an acute care bed space. So yes, we are working for that exact population, kupuna and people that are medically frail.
Yeah, and Connie, we've talked about this before, the idea that we do have this aging population that are high risk and that their needs are different.
Absolutely. And so I think when you're dealing with kupuna, You have to be planning ahead also, because some of the folks, you're going to age, and many people now who are not homeless, they're going into assisted living. And I've always advocated for more of a public assisted living, people who can't afford some of these other communities, that the state would fund, these type of places where people can either age in place, with people coming in to support, or at least, have the supportive services that can help them make the transition when they can no longer live independently, because that will happen for some people as well.
Yeah, and to the caller's question, do we see families moving into these spaces?
I think most of the Kauhane are not of that type. Of course, we have HAWAIʻI Village, which is
all
sort of
families,
like that, yeah.
right?
And it's really not the same, because they're small, but they're not tiny like the homes. That
And we
way.
are iterating it, and we started strong with these 100 square foot units, but we're actually looking at the next iteration for couples, for families, and perhaps a pet owner can be, a pet situation can be part of that as well. But we want to be cost efficient, and there is a model that we currently have that makes that effective, and so we're trying to really figure this out. How do we not stick build and recreate new all the time? We want to have a portfolio for the state that's pretty standardized, but it serves all these subpopulations, and so we're working on that as we go into each community as well.
Yeah, John, when we look at this and we think about other states and other, how we know that homelessness is an issue across our country right now, are there other communities that have done this well, or is Hawaii sort of on the cutting edge?
Absolutely. Austin, Texas, Community First Village, excellent program. But I think our state's going to be the leader in addressing homelessness with Kauhane, with our village concept. But yes, Austin, Texas does it well. Utah does it quite well. In Europe, you've got Finland and some of the other European nations doing quite well at housing first programs. But yes, I think eventually Hawaii's going to be a leader in this effort.
Just to maybe narrow, in the private sector, there has been other villages that have been developed across the nation, but no government has focused on this type of strategy, and that's what makes this government particularly unique and different. So that's, I think, just something to kind of, acknowledge. This governor has made it a policy to have a development arm specifically for homeless, and that's not federal policy or state policy across the nation.
And I wanted to add, Governor Green's vision, he wants to do something that no other state and nation has done, reduce chronically homeless by half. California, Texas, Florida, no way, not even close. If we can make his mark within the next 3 years, we'll have done something historic. No other state's done this.
Tell us the numbers, though. What are we at right now, and what is the goal then to get that to happen?
Last point in time count, 6,223. Chronically homeless, over 4,000. Those are the ones that don't have shelter at all. Governor wants to cut that in half, at least reduce chronically homeless by 2,000. No other state and nation has ever done this. It's a great goal, and we're all working together to try to achieve that.
We have just about 3 minutes left, but I want to get to Dan's question right here, and perhaps, John, you might be the person, or maybe any of you, but we'll start with you. He says, great, hopeful, informative discussion. Please give us in the orders of magnitude, number of units in a community, construction costs, operation costs. So number of units in a community. We are hoping for 12 by the end of this year?
12 by the end of this year, 20 by next year, and I'll pivot
Yeah,
to
and pivot to you
Kimo.
for the construction cost.
For the tiny home unit alone, it's about 16,000 per unit. We value engineered it down pretty affordably. For the communities, it's averaging somewhere in the 30,000s all in, which includes the infrastructure development, the community spaces, office spaces, and the units itself.
And I know this varies by Kauhane because the needs of the residents are so different, but on sort of a, broad scale, to Dan's question, operation costs, what does it cost to run one of these?
I wouldn't be able to tell you. It really depends on how many beds, how many units, and then also what kind of services are needed. Because the one that we have been, we just started at Paipaiho, it costs less because we don't have that degree of like 24/7, situation, where we have to have supervision. But I think that, you just have to know that it really pays for itself, because when you think about getting chronically homeless people off the street and into a place where they feel like they're really recovering, you're going to reduce not only the medical costs, hospitalization, you're going to reduce incarceration, you're going to reduce law enforcement costs, judiciary costs, so there's a lot of costs that, comes with homelessness. And so I think if we can do this, we'll benefit definitely in the savings in all of those systems.
John, when can we expect to see the next one? Where are you hoping to open next?
Next month, Pastor Kim's, 16 units. Again, 11 for kupuna and 5 for medical frail.
Okay. And Kimo, if people do want to get involved, if they want to pick up that hammer for you, how do they get in touch?
Visit HomeAidHawaii.org and give us a call and let us know.
Okay, we have about 30 seconds left. I'm just curious to know, you've been on this from the beginning. What is it like when you see folks get to go into the homes that you've built?
Yeah, my staff and I, it's exciting. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that gets put into this hard work. And I think when you see somebody who accepts their keys and they're feeling grateful and they feel that they have this new start to their life, it is probably one of the most fulfilling moments that you can ever ask for. I've been fortunate to work for Connie and now, with in partnership with their government, and I think it just continues to inspire me every time we do this.
Great. Well, we'll have to leave it there. Mahalo to you for joining us tonight, and we do thank our guests, John Mizuno, the State Coordinator on Homelessness, and Kimo Carvalho, the of HomeAid Hawaii, and from the Institute for Human Services, Connie Mitchell. Next week here on Insights, it's a wrap for this year's legislative session. We'll hear from state lawmakers on the last-minute wheeling and dealing and find out what bills died and what passed this year, how it will all benefit Hawaii residents. Please do join us then. I'm Yanji Denise for Insights. Until next time, aloha.
Local broadcasts of Insights on PBS Hawaii are made possible by the support of viewers like you. Mahalo, and by Carl Smith Ball, providing legal services throughout Hawaii and the Pacific since 1857, making a positive difference in the communities where we live and work.
I like dancing hula because it's a part of my culture.